Well, it was a weekend in the United States, so of course we had another one of these unspeakable tragedies involving guns, and this one is particularly bad. We always have mass shootings in the US. It's hard to find a weekend without at least one mass shooting, but we had a particularly bad one. And this one, because of the rhetoric involved, because of the alleged manifesto left behind by the alleged killer, we actually have insight into the stochastic terrorism element of this situation. So I'm going to explain it to you. As a reminder, tragically, I've been talking about stochastic terrorism on this program for at least 11 years. Back in 2011, I did a segment called Stochastic Terrorism and Violent Rhetoric, Unpredictability of Shooters. And the fundamental idea is that given a large enough audience, if you pump out a particular message time and time and time again, focusing anger and focusing resentment and antipathy towards a particular group of individuals, you will, at a certain point, influence someone enough who says, I'm going to go and shoot, bomb, whatever the case may be. We've had instances of this in the past, and here we have one related to so-called great replacement theory or white replacement theory, and critical race theory and all of it. So let's take it step by step. Mass shooting took place over the weekend at Tops Friendly Market Supermarket in Buffalo, New York. 10 people were killed, 3 were injured. Of the 13 victims, 11 were black and 2 were white, and this was not a coincidence. This was not by mere chance. This is being considered a hate crime. The shooter live streamed part of the attack on Twitch. Twitch says they caught it within 2 minutes and cut the stream. The shooter is white, 18-year-old, and deliberately traveled to an area with a higher population of black people because he wanted to kill black people. The shooter was wearing body armor and a military-grade helmet and armed with 3 firearms, a semi-automatic rifle, allegedly a Bushmaster XM15, a hunting rifle, and a shotgun. That's what we know right now, and had a head-mounted camera. That's the camera from which the event was streamed. The suspect was captured alive and was arraigned in the Buffalo City Court on the day of the shooting, represented by a public defender. Felony hearings scheduled to begin later this week in front of a grand jury. He's being held without bail. Now, this is where it starts to get, don't make it political. Well, right-wing political media literally wrote the script for this guy's manifesto. He reportedly wrote, the shooter, a 180-page manifesto that was released prior to the shooting. I'm not going to publish the manifesto, but you can find it. I'll give you some of the highlights. And there's actually a good Twitter thread by J.J. McNabb, a fellow at George Washington University's program on extremism. Some of the things from the manifesto. The shooter self-identifies as a white supremacist fascist with neo-Nazi beliefs who is anti-high fertility immigrants under the white replacement theory. This is the idea that immigrants who aren't white come to the U.S. to have a lot of kids to demographically take over the country. He states he was radicalized online on 4chan and was inspired by Brenton Tarrant's manifesto and live-streamed mass shooting in New Zealand. You might remember that one. The shooter chose his target because it has a higher percentage of black Americans than other nearby areas. The manifesto is 180 pages long. Dozens of pages are nothing more than anti-black and anti-Semitic memes and statistics, and almost 100 pages contained mind-numbingly boring info about every piece of equipment he considered taking on the shooting spree. Now, there is so much to talk about here. There's the mentally ill thing, right? Oftentimes, we've seen this before, and I don't do this, but you often see the trend of, if the shooter is Muslim, then it's radical beliefs that are responsible and the community of the individual. If it's a young white dude, then it's a lone mentally ill guy whose mental illness alone, and not the fact that the manifesto reads like a Fox News script, are responsible. It's important to remember a couple of things. One, in some sense, you can argue any of these people are not mentally right. Anybody willing to do this is not mentally right. But when you look at the manifesto, it's perfectly cogent and coherent. And it's not someone who doesn't understand the consequences of their actions. And most importantly, most mentally ill people are not violent. Most mentally ill people never commit a violent act. Look at the list of so-called mental illnesses. Now, I know that not all of these are exactly the same category, but think about, anxiety, bipolar disorder, depression, OCD, paranoia, paranoid schizophrenia, delusional disorder, borderline personality disorder, mania, panic disorder, PTSD, depersonalization, derealization disorder, anorexia, bulimia, parasomnias, kleptomania. This is a broad range of stuff. But the point is, almost none of the folks with those conditions ever become violent. Now, I get that something is wrong with the people who are violent, but to say, oh, well, this is just a therapist solves this problem, ignoring the political motivations, ignoring the access to firearms, ignoring all of it. When you look at the manifesto, it's articulate, fascist, racist hate linked to ideas that we see in corporate media. The talk about white birth rates. The document talks about critical race theory. That's something, listen, it's like a Republican talking point at this point in time. It says that it's all part of a Jewish plot. And oftentimes there's anti-Semitism in this stuff. It's the full complement of the things they've been pushing openly since Trump became president, even since right before when his campaign started. Now, let's just look at some examples. Here's Ben Shapiro. Democrats want open borders. They want to bring in tens of millions of illegals to vote.
The Biden administration has done less than nothing. They're now talking about ending Title 42, which would basically allow the borders to be swamped. Their own DHS is estimating up to 18,000 people a day may be descending on the border, which, of course, completely destroys whatever semblance of order there is on the border. There isn't much there right now. So what do you make of the border situation?
I think it's literally criminal what Biden and the administration has done. They swore to faithfully defend and uphold the laws of the United States. And
remember, almost nothing different is being done by Biden versus Trump at the border.
It's not even like they're trying. It's not like they're trying and failing, right? That would be bad enough. Mere incompetence would be costly enough. But they just want this open border. This is their policy program. From the Democrats' perspective, they like it. It's good. It's 225,000 people coming across every month, not every year, every month. The amount of fentanyl that comes over every month is enough to kill every American twice over. Of course, most of the people brought over are trafficked by cartels. So there's a human slavery component. The women and children are horribly abused, bona fide humanitarian crisis. And it's just bad. It's bad for everybody in Arizona. It's bad for the whole country. But this is the way Democrats like it. And again, I'm bold enough to admit the obvious, right? Which is that they're doing this so that someday they can amnesty these people and make them voters who they expect to vote Democrat. This is an electoral strategy for the Democrats. Their policies are so bad. And
So we've already debunked this extensively. Even if it was what Democrats wanted to do, it's a terrible, terrible strategy. And I've explained many times why. The math of it doesn't make any sense. But the point is, here is that anger at Democrats deliberately dumping in tens of millions of illegals into the country. That's not what Democrats want to do. Tucker Carlson, remember, immigrants make our country poorer and dirtier.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Here's a funny thing that we noticed the other day. People debate all the time about mass immigration. What you never hear anybody do is make the economic case for mass immigration. But as an economic matter, this is insane. It's indefensible, so nobody even tries to defend it. Instead, our leaders demand that you shut up and accept this. We have a moral obligation to admit the world's poor, they tell us, even if it makes our own country poorer and dirtier and more divided.
It's hard to get more specific rhetoric than that is straight out of the manifesto. Here's another Tucker Carlson clip where he is doing the replacement theory talking points that were echoed in the shooter's manifesto.
I'm laughing because this is one of about 10 stories that I know you've covered where the government shows preference to people who have shown absolute contempt for our customs, our laws, our system itself, and they're being treated better than American citizens. Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. If this was happening in your house, if you were in 6th grade, for example, and without telling
I remember covering this at the time. Listen to this.
Your parents adopted a bunch of new siblings and gave them brand new bikes and let them stay up later and help them with their homework and gave them twice the allowance that they gave you. you would say to your siblings, I think we're being replaced by kids that our parents love more. And it becomes
this is the great replacement theory stuff that was in the manifesto. Charlie Kirk has been pushing this stuff.
President Joe Biden's Department of Defense will accept 30,000 Afghan refugees into military installations following the collapse of Kabul. Boom. Political transformation.
There it is.
Let the country crumble. Do you know there's 5 million displaced people in Afghanistan now? This was all intentional. Joe Biden let it fall apart to now say, oh, I'm so sorry. I guarantee you Joe Biden's speech this afternoon will talk about refugee assistance and relocation support.
Yep. The entire point of getting out of Afghanistan was so it would go poorly, so that then they can bring in people to replace white people from Afghanistan. Lauren Boebert has done this stuff.
Yes, there is definitely a replacement theory that's going on right now. We are killing American jobs and bringing in illegal aliens from all over the world to replace them if Americans will not comply with.
Replace them. Replace them. So there is serious responsibility here. I'm not saying there's going to be accountability. I'm not saying what they're doing is criminal. The term stochastic terrorism is not a criminal term. It's a term that we as reasonable people can say, wow, they repeat this rhetoric. And then the rhetoric is used in a manifesto, and it's what made this guy go and seek out black people. I'm not saying you can charge any of them. I'm just saying we have to speak honestly and acknowledge that these ideas didn't come out of thin air. Now, one other note before we move on. This was not the only mass shooting this weekend. So, yes, there was the mass shooting in Buffalo, but we also had a mass shooting in Milwaukee with 17 injuries on Friday. And we also had mass shootings in Houston, Texas, Laguna Woods, California, Amarillo, Texas, as well as Winston-Salem, North Carolina, this weekend. So always remember, in the United States of America, there's never just one mass shooting. And we do ultimately get to the question of what do we do? Because there's this fallacy of tolerance. If we tolerate the intolerant, then they go out and kill people, and those people that die no longer can practice that tolerance. There is this fallacy there. And this problem that needs to be dealt with. And we're going to keep covering all of this. But we have to talk about what Fox News is blaming as well.